Hello and welcome to the Car Care Reviews channel, and welcome to the 2024 Volkswagen Tiguan in the US. And you're going to find out why I said that. In today's video, we're going to do a proper technical review of the Tiguan. We're going to take a look under the hood, underneath the car, inside and outside. We'll talk about some things we like, some things we do not like, right after this. Let's start our technical review under the hood, which the Tiguan in the US only has one engine option, and that would be the 2-liter direct injected turbocharged 4-cylinder engine called the EA888. Let's dive into its mechanical construction, and we'll talk about it some more. So at the very top, you have not a plastic valve cover, you have an aluminum valve cover. The reason for that is this does not have cam caps. The valve cover actually contains the cam caps, and it just sits on top, and that's that. Does not have a gasket, has a sealer because it is the cam cap. Underneath that valve cover, there's actually dual overhead cams with hydraulic lifters and roller rockers. That is pretty cool and modern. This does have a very sophisticated variable valve timing and variable valve lift. It is pretty cutting edge, even in 2024, even though it's a little bit of an older engine, it's still pretty cutting edge. Now there is a surprise with this engine, which is the block is cast iron. Usually this is the first thing that gets modernized in an engine, but this one keeps it old school. I like it. I like it. However, this engine in its previous iterations did have a tendency of consuming oil. So one advice I'll give you if you own one of these, whatever the interval for the oil change, cut it in half. If you don't want to have issues, these do have low tension rings, and yeah, long oil change intervals is going to be a problem for this engine. So cut them in half. This engine is turbocharged. Turbo sits all the way in the back. Not a huge turbo, but it is electronic wastegate. It is, however, air-to-air intercooler. So the intercooler sits in the front. You have piping that goes to it. Pretty old school and simple. Now, the cooling system in this car is rather strange. Let's talk about it. You do have a kind of a distribution valve that sends coolant where it needs to go for faster warm-ups and everything, and that's great. Now, the water pump is a strange decision, and strange from the outside, but if you're into German cars, that is just the norm. So this car has a drive belt that drives the alternator, drives the AC compressor. That is pretty standard. It's right where you expect it to be. The water pump is not there. The water pump is on this side of the engine, on the back side, and it's driven by a tiny little belt behind. So basically, if every time you want to do a water pump on this, you have to remove the intake manifold in a complicated fashion that is completely unnecessary, if you ask me. But there's a lot of space in the front. Why can't we put it there? Why couldn't we just put an electric one somewhere else? They didn't, and that's okay. Now this engine is direct injected only, and the high pressure fuel pump actually sits a little bit to the side of the valve cover, and it does have 4 direct injectors. They actually sit underneath the intake manifold, not on top, which is a good place for it. Now the transmission on this is a bit of a mystery to me and others. A lot of speculations about it. There's actually no concrete info. I really did some research on this. The transmission is sourced out of Japan. It's a Japanese 8-speed transmission. Torque converter, nothing really special about it, but I wonder if it's an ACEN transmission. Because really, I tried to look for identifiers without removing things, just looking from the outside. I don't see anything, which is kind of interesting. Is this an ACEN transmission, Volkswagen? We'd really love to know. Now let's talk about some interesting observations. Just me kind of looking around under the hood and using my mechanic's eyes and looking at things. There is an extensive use of plastic with cooling parts, and there are a lot of things that are very interesting, and there are a lot of things that are very questionable. I'll just have to say the truth. I wish this had a plastic valve cover instead of that aluminum. Yes, you heard me right, because with that comes a plastic front timing cover, at least the upper part. So this cylinder head is kind of a strange orientation. It has a protrusion that you can't remove, and then there's a cover at the top, cover at the bottom. Now the cover at the top is plastic. That's where your oil fill cap is. There's a gasket. It's accessible. I suppose we can live with that. But the bottom cover is steel, which is really nice. However, according to the book, every time you remove it, because it does have sealer, it will get mangled, so you should replace it every time. So what was the point of putting a steel cover? Just put another plastic one. It's going to break anyways, and we'll replace it. That's what I don't understand. And the extensive need of special tools in this engine is the concern. This is an everyday car. You put this many special tools, things are going to start getting pretty expensive. And that's the downside of this. I mean, looking around here, there are some things that just significantly overbuilt. Some things that should be overbuilt, they're very flimsy and basic and cheap feeling. Let's look at the first example of that. This entire dash is probably held in by 2 screws and the rest are clips. This is how all modern cars is. There's nothing against the Volkswagen. But then we look at the air filter of the Tiguan. Let us do the counting of how many bolts hold the air filter just to replace it. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 bolts holding your air filter. And no, not holding the housing, just to replace your air filter. But then right next to that, there's this giant flimsy PCV hose that is just ready to break just by you looking at it. I don't understand why they do these things. It's just few clamps, clips would have been perfectly fine for this air filter, but that's how they deemed it necessary. And then we'll look beyond that at the very alarming finishing on this car. It really breaks my heart because it's a really beautiful car. Volkswagen, on their build quality of the body, they're usually pretty good, but this one is kind of not there. When you look at areas right here underneath the windshield, that almost to me looks like it's been an accident and a shady body shop just put it together. No, that's how this car is. Same thing here, and same thing on the other side. I don't know what happened there. That's just not good sealer application. The truth have to be said. And the other thing is the hood latch. There is something very interesting about this. So 99% of cars, unless it's a Volkswagen, you come to the hood, there's a secondary safety release. So in case you pop your hood and you start driving and you didn't notice, it wouldn't pop and hit the glass and cause damage. They have a secondary. That secondary's purpose is to leave the hood closed, and then when you pop the hood and you want to go open it, you have to release it. Every car will have that secondary on the latch. It's very basic, except the Volkswagen. It has the hook there, but the way it works, just look at this. Isn't this super over-engineered? That's just how they deemed it. I feel like it was an afterthought, but it was very interesting to look at. I just wish we would have a couple of flimsy clamps for the air filter and less plastic components here. That would really make things better here, folks. Let's take a look underneath the 2024 Volkswagen Tiguan. Now, one thing I will say before we get into it, this is technically a car from the 2010s, so bear in mind things will be a little different. There is nothing covering the engine and the powertrain. There's a little cover and the rest is fully exposed. That's just how we used to do things back in the 2010s. Now, I would like to bring your attention to a couple things. The engine is made by Volkswagen. The transmission is an unknown Japanese company. It's completely made in Japan. And the Japanese do things a little different than Volkswagen. So keep that in mind as we look through it. This is the automotive industry's worst idea. Sorry, Volkswagen, but the truth has to be said. This is a plastic oil pan. Now, the plastic part is not the worst part. What is the worst part? If you come around and look at this. This is the drain plug for this car. So when you can change the oil. That is a plastic drain plug. That is a part you will take out of this car, hopefully, less than what they recommend. And that will strip at some point, and now you have to replace the oil pan. Really not a great idea. And then you have the oil level sensor right next to it. Another plastic part bolted to a plastic oil pan. This is just not a good idea, folks. The truth has to be said. No, everybody agrees that this is not a great idea. And what surprises me is the later iteration of this engine actually got rid of that, but this one still has it, and that's it. But the transmission has a steel pan. I mean, a lot of modern transmissions have plastic pans to save weight. This one has a steel pan. So this is the part that I told you about where these two are made. So you see right here, there's a transfer case coming out of the transmission. You see it right here? It's a mechanical transfer case. It's always sending power to the back. When we get to the back, we'll talk about it. Just wanted to highlight it. But let's look at the front suspension here. So you have steel control arm with a separate ball joint, which is a really cool design for service. Aluminum knuckle. This is the German manufacturers started with aluminum parts much earlier than everybody else, and this shows it. McPherson strut design at the top. You do have a single piston caliper in the front. It's a pretty large caliper. This is not a large car, but usually European manufacturers, they're about driving dynamics, so usually put bigger brakes than similar car from other manufacturers. Steel sway bar link right here, which I really like. This is a good idea. And as we may move our way back, everything is covered. And this was something back in 2010s, where this car comes from. This was something that the European manufacturers really did well. They always covered their cars. Yes, some of the covers make service harder, but it made for quieter, more insulated cars. Exhaust is okay. It's not the best in the world. It's not the worst in the world, although this style is not a great idea, but that's how they do things. We have a saddle fuel tank here that goes over. Here's that drive shaft that comes from the front. They do have the flex discs on this. This is, again, German manufacturer special. They never use U-joints. They always use flex discs. Now, this is the rear differential, and what's in front of the rear differential is the coupler that engages. You see a little motor right here. This is what engages and disengages all-wheel drive. So that's again, simple design. It works. Let's look at the rear suspension here. This is a multi-link suspension. Again, they were way ahead of everybody else with this design. Now, pretty much everybody in the auto industry has this design. Got a trailing arm that is steel, aluminum knuckle, multiple arms that are all steel. The rear brakes are actually single piston caliper with an electronic parking brake integrated into them. So they were also one of the first to start doing this. Again, this is old by today's standards, but when this came out, this was big stuff. Let's look at the rear exhaust, because this is for lack of a better word, a deception going on here. If you come look at the car from the outside, when I look at it a little bit when it's down, it looks like it has the tailpipes right here. Well, actually it doesn't. They did this with the Atlas that we looked at a few weeks back. Exhaust ends here, and you notice that they cut it very short. It's a very strange shape because they don't want it to be visible from the outside. I don't know why they do this. I wish they would just make this proper. This is the R line. This would look really nice. They didn't do that, and that's okay. We do have an opening here, I'm assuming for a trailer hitch. Kind of interesting that it just stays wide open like that. And equally, this is wide open. And this is wide open on the other side. I don't know why the manufacturers love to do that, but yeah, they do. Overall, the build quality here, see, Volkswagen for the longest time, the big stuff they get right. It's the little stuff that not always get right. I really wish this went to the bumper and they got that right. They usually get stuff like this very right, but this one, not so much. Let's take a look at the outside of the 2024 Volkswagen Tiguan. There has to be something said. This is a very classy looking car. I really, especially in this R-line trim, I really think it looks good and have aged super well. And I say it aged super well. These are all design, folks. It just has a certain Volkswagen European feel to it that it's a really good looking car. I'll just leave it at that, but let's investigate why it does look good. See, they went a little bit too much with the bumper, but if you look at the hood dimensions, there's a line right here that takes a sharp turn to make this almost 90-degree here, and just gives it this blocky look. It just looks unique. I really like this. They really went brave on the lines of this car. There's a tiny little line here that raises this part up, gives it kind of a muscular look in the front. This thing is a looker, I have to say that. As you roll around the side, you can see the total US regulation reflector here, because they don't have that in Europe. We have it here, so it just looks like a complete afterthought. I don't like that these are not body color, but I think we can live with that. But the biggest design feature of this car starts right here. So, to me, when we look at this car, it almost feels like two cars cut and then one sitting on top of the other. Bear with me and you'll see it. You see this line, it kind of creates this big crease right here. And then there's another line that starts right here. and it gives it these two lines. If you look at it from far away, it almost looks like two objects sitting on top of each other, just two separate things. It's just a very interesting design. It's just a simple thing to do, but it gives it a very, very distinct look. I really like the profile of this. It just has the quintessential SUV look. No drama, just comes in, comes down, and that's it. But it's these two little lines that give this car kind of a distinct look. Now, I really like the wheels on this, but what I don't like about the wheels is not the wheels themselves. It's Volkswagen's insistence on putting these little caps that do absolutely nothing but complicate service. I wish they would get rid of that. And then because of this nice line that we talked about, let's look at the shape of this fuel door. Once it wants to open. That's a very interesting shape for a fuel door. Very, very interesting. Now this car, since we are talking about fuel, does take regular fuel, which is something to be expected. Then we look at the back, and it's the same thing with the back. It's a looker. This car looks really good. There are a few things that I think make it look good. They have clean lines in the back. Look at the back door itself. They didn't go overboard. They don't have a panel here. See, most cars in this era, they used to have a panel here. This one kind of comes in and just clean cuts into the entrance. So it gives it a very distinct line. I really like the font that they used here. Wish they would use that in the new one as well. Tiguan, Volkswagen badge. SE, which is the trim, 4Motion all-wheel drive. We could lose the SE or 4Motion, it would be even better. But the one thing, and this is a cue back to the older cars, you have a giant bumper here. You know, new cars, this back door will be right here. You just, anything hits it, will hit it, but this one has a giant bumper. Miss those days because it gives us room for error when you drive. Now, we looked at it when we looked underneath it. These are what appear to be the exhaust, but it's actually not the exhaust. This is just fake. I wish they didn't do that. It kind of looks odd. But let's look at the back area here. This is a 2-row SUV. This is not a 3-row SUV, but it does have a really nice size back. What I like about it more is you can fold these seats from here, but in a 2-step process. So you fold them, they go, but they're still high. You actually have to go in the back, push them in to clip them. Now they're locked. I just wish they would do that on their own. That would be nice. Not have to do a 2-step process. Then there's a little loop here to pull them up. But I suppose we can live with that. But there's a few more things. Because this is a car from the 2010s, we have a spare tire, which is really nice. That is a nice sight to see in 2024. And then there's interesting things here. This is a power door, and we've been talking about all manufacturers going to the motor inside the shock. Volkswagen did something here, I'm assuming for cost cutting, but it kind of negates the whole point of having the 2-motor design. See, in the past, we used to have a motor, came right here, and it opened the door and closed it. What that did was it puts it's kind of a sideways tension on the door, and the door eventually would bend, and then this motor goes, and here we go. This one does the same thing, but in this style. Because if you look at this, there is no wire coming out of this, because this is just the shock. And here, you have a wire going to it, because the motor is here. The bad side of that is it's still putting sideways tension on this door and potentially bending the frame, and now we have all kinds of issues. Good side is if this ever goes out and you don't want to shell out some more fortune and replace it, just buy one on the other side and make it fit here, and you have a manual door. That's the only good side I see out of it. Couple interesting things about this door. Because of the beautiful design on the outside and how this taillight protrudes, let's look at this cutout, this massive cutout that they had to make in this door just to make the design work. It doesn't affect functionality at all, so I like it. I like little things like that. The other thing is, should this latch not want to work one day, they always put you a manual release. That's all cars, in case the electronic part doesn't want to work, because the button is electronic. It's a button, there's no physical button. So most manufacturers put a little flimsy door here. They really went all out with this door that has its own lock. You open it and then the manual releases in. I just thought that was very interesting that they actually put an actual door with this latch, and now you can use it for some, I don't know, a couple papers you can hide here. I guess you can use it for that. Let's take a look at the interior of the 2024 Volkswagen Tiguan. And this is where things are not great for the Tiguan. This interior is seriously showing its age, and not in a good way. I feel like they tried their best to update it, but it's ready for a refresh. First, the materials. They are, for lack of a better word, very 2010s and very plasticky. For this price range, you look at competitors, so even within Volkswagen, this could seriously need a refresh. I mean, the dash looks very bland and just very basic. There's absolutely no design cues or anything to make it look nicer. And all the nice bits about it, they feel like they're add-ons and aftermarket stuff because they tried to update it as much as possible. Case in point being the infotainment system. This totally looks like an aftermarket radio. While the radio works okay, it's not the best radio on the planet, but it does have wireless Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, does have decent functionality. It's relatively fast, not the fastest one on the planet, but it completely looks like an aftermarket add-on. This doesn't fit the rest of the car. Same thing with the HVAC controls. They are this touch capacitive, which tells me it's from modern stuff for Volkswagen. They are technically physical or outside of the screen, but it also feels like a complete last-minute add-on. Now, the good old school stuff, physical shifter, which works very well, and decent array of physical buttons here, although half of them are blank for this higher trim one. You do have this mode button, which is very strange. So the outside ring is like the terrain mode, and the middle one is the drive mode, which is pretty strange orientation. And then the steering wheel completely doesn't fit the rest of the interior. It's very nice leather. The shape is not a perfect round. It just has these protrusions on the sides, flat at the bottom. And it also has these touch capacitive buttons, which tells me that was also an update. The steering wheel material is very nice and does not match the rest of the interior. So that's another one of those add-ons. But then there are the strange stuff. So the center console is tiny and it's pushed so far back that when I sit here, I'm almost falling off of it. It's not really long, and then doesn't even have a latch. It just kind of sits there. So once this latch wears down a little bit with time, this will just start rattling because there's nothing to hold it in place. And then more interesting stuff. The side mirrors are heated, which is nice, but they don't come on with a defrost or with a heater. No, you have to pay attention to the mirrors control, and you have to turn it all the way back to engage them. Now, I guess they're kind of on demand, but yeah, I wish they would come on automatically. That would be nice. Not a dedicated button for them, which most people probably won't know that they're there. The other thing is the start button. Start button is not here where you expect it in every single car. It's right next to the shifter. That is okay. But because there is a model of the Tiguan that does not have a start button as a key, you have this very last-minute plug, for lack of a better word. And so this is actually where you would put the key in case the battery is dead to start the car. But this is the first thing you see when you sit in the passenger seat, just this giant plug where the key would have been, but it is not. The last thing is the gauges. So this is again kind of old school technology. You have this big screen in the middle and little fake gauges on the side and this illusion of a ambient light, and you have some lights on the doors. You can change the color, but yeah, 2 gauges would have been perfectly fine. If you're looking at the higher trims, skip that because it doesn't do absolutely nothing. It just looks super outdated, and I wish there was 2 gauges. At least that kind of is timeless and doesn't get outdated. And the last thing that is very interesting in the front here, so this has a big panoramic sunroof. It does take forever for the shade to open. It feels like it's just going to fall off the back of the car. It takes so long. But here's an interesting thing. They put 2 completely dedicated buttons. One of them slides the shade and opens the roof, and then 2 more buttons just for the shade in a completely different spot. could have consolidated. You know, you push this once, it opens the shade, you push it again, slides it up, push it again. Could have these consolidations make things easier, not have more and more and more buttons that basically do the same thing. Now, driving impressions in this car, it is decently quiet. It's not the quietest car in the world, but it's okay. It does have a certain cool European feel to it, but the steering could use some work. The on-center feel is not really good. It is somewhat confidence inspiring. I mean, this is not a sports car, but an on-center feel that is more stable would make this car a little nicer. At higher speeds, it is not the most stable car in the world. That was kind of a surprise. Usually Volkswagen really get their cars to handle well. This one not included in that list. Let's take a look at the second row of the Tiguan. I'm 5'7", this is my driving position. I have a lot of knee room. This is a pretty big back seat, and that is one of the cool things about this car. I have decent headroom, even with this panoramic sunroof, which is nice. But that's unfortunately where nice ends. I mean, the door panel material here is the same thing in the front. It is not nice. This really needs an update. The handle moves, everything is not exactly great. And you notice again some of their attempts at updating this. You do have a USB-C in the back, but right next to it there is a 12-volt outlet, which is super outdated. I mean, there's not even a USB-A, and that's where this car seriously shows its age. Function-wise, though, when we have to be fair, this is a pretty large, surprisingly large. When you look at this from the outside, it doesn't feel that big, but this is very, very spacious. I can almost sit super comfortably here behind somebody my height as well in the front. And even if they're taller, I still have a lot of room here, and that is really cool. So function-wise, this is a good second row seat. Let's talk about some things I do not like about this car. And the biggest thing about this car, especially in 2024, in this particular iteration, is longevity. They don't have a good track record of longevity. That's not exactly their main thing. Their main thing is, this is a very cool car that looks different. It's the Volkswagen way. They don't copy everybody in their fashion and trends. They do their own way. They usually do it very well. They're usually very good looking, very featureful, very cool. This one, however, is really starting to show its age. On the outside, it still looks good, but then on the inside, it's really behind. And the biggest problem with this car is Volkswagen's decision to release a third generation, not in the US though, or at least not yet. That seriously puts this car in a tough spot, because you already know what the new generation is going to look like. Oh, it really does look good. Here's a couple pictures of that inside and outside. It looks really good. And that's the whole point of this car. So when buyers of Volkswagen Tiguan know that there's a new model coming and it looks like that, it'll put this in a really tough spot. I'll leave it at that, I suppose. The Volkswagen Tiguan. It's always been a kind of a cool, fun SUV that is a little bit better looking than its competitors and kind of have a little bit more lively. However, things in 2024 for this particular generation are starting to show their age. The outside look, it looks great. It still looks great. And I really admire certain design things in it that are unique to the 2010s. However, that good feeling goes away the minute you open the door and get inside. It's seriously starting to show its age. The radio feels like it's a last-minute add-on. The screen in the dash does absolutely nothing. It's even worse than the modern car screens that do absolutely nothing. And then the whole feel of the inside, the materials, is really starting to show its age. While it's still a functional SUV, but at its price in 2024, I'm afraid the competition have really caught up, because they're all redesigned their cars, and this one is desperately needing a redesign. A redesign which already happened in Europe, but we haven't gotten it here yet. And here's a few pictures of that. That is one sharp looking Tiguan, in my opinion, and kind of follows the theme of this. Usually folks, when it comes to models toward the end of their life cycle, they'll say, well, we'll buy the last year model. It's the one with the least problems and they worked out all the bugs. But unfortunately, this particular car, the powertrain engineering, while very impressive on paper, in the real world, long-term reliability is a concern. The extensive use of plastic and their kind of reputation of not lasting very long makes buying the last year kind of like the opposite of the point of this car. The point of this car is it's a very sharp looking car. It's very fun. You don't have to drive a drab kitchen appliance type of SUV. They usually handle well. They look great. They have cool features. But this one seriously needs a refresh. And the refresh is already there. It might, if they continue with the Tiguan sales in the US, you will see that potentially in the next year or two. So we're really excited for that. But I'll leave you with that for the 2024 Volkswagen Tiguan, because who knows, maybe this will be the last year you see this one. Next year you see a new model. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. Until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.